Hi, good evening, everybody. Ooh, that might be too low. Good evening, good evening. I'm so glad to see you all here tonight. Thank you for coming. I have the distinct pleasure, my name is Gina, by the way, Gina with Gwinnett County Public Library. So we welcome you tonight, and I have the distinct honor of being able to introduce our guest for the evening. All right, Carol Anderson, Dr. Carol Anderson will be moderating tonight's talk. Carol Anderson is the Charles Howard Candler Professor of African American Studies at Emory University and author of White Rage, a New York Times bestseller, Washington Post Notable Book of 2016, and a National Book Critics Circle Award winner. She is also the author of Eyes on the Prize, The United Nations and the African American Struggle for Human Rights, and One Person, No Vote, How Voter Suppression is Destroying Our Democracy, which was longlisted for the National Book Award and a finalist for the Penn Galbraith Award in Nonfiction. Honorée Fannone Jeffers is our featured author of the evening, and she is a fiction writer, poet, and essayist. Let's give her a round of applause. She is the author of 5 poetry collections, including the 2020 collection, The Age of Phyllis, which won the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literary Work in Poetry and the Lenore Marshall Poetry Prize, and was longlisted for the National Book Award for Poetry. She was a contributor to The Fire This Time, A New Generation Speaks About Race, edited by Jasmine Ward, and has been published in the Kenyon, I always get that wrong. Kenyon Review, Iowa Review, and other literary publications. Jeffers was elected into the American Antiquarian Society, whose members include 14 U.S. presidents, and is a critic at large for Kenyon Review. Thank you, Pete. We're learning something new every day. She teaches creative writing and literature at the University of Oklahoma. The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois is her first novel and was a New York Times bestseller, an Oprah Book Club pick, the winner of the National Book Critics Award for Fiction, longlisted for the National Book Award, shortlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, a finalist for the Kirkus Prize for Fiction, longlisted for the Aspen Awards Literary Prize, and named one of the great American novels in the past 100 years by The Atlantic. So thank you. Let's continue that applause.
Thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for honoring Honorée, because this book is magnificent. And that is not a word that I use often. Magnificent. You know, it's so, what was it? Phenomenal. This thing is smoking. This thing parted the Red Sea and walked on some water.
Love that one. I'm getting all choked up here. My mama would be so proud.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Because this book is just doggone amazing. And so I want to get into this amazing book. So I'm going to ask some just basic questions.
Okay.
Because this thing is like 800 and some pages.
It's only 797.
Yeah, like I said. How long did it take you to research and write it? And what was your motivation to dive into this incredibly beautiful, complicated family story?
So I was writing The Age of Phyllis, my 5th book of poetry, which imagines the life and times of Phyllis Wheatley Peters. That's who we call her now, because there's new research that has been published that reclaims John Peters' legacy. I'm just sort of throwing that in there, right? And so I insisted, I did a whole 10-year thing. We need to call her the name that she chose, okay? So I was doing research on Phyllis Wheatley Peters ever since 2003. And I was doing extensive research on the transatlantic slave trade and the 18th century and the beginning of the white supremacist foundation for race, right? So that took me a really long time because I'm a poet. I don't have a doctorate, and so I had to teach myself how to do archival research. So while I was doing that, I was trying to write, and people always laugh. I always wish people didn't laugh, but they laugh. I was trying to write a beach read. Okay. So what happened was I only wanted to write. Y'all are going like, why y'all laughing at me? So let me just try to, long story short. So I had an agent and I only ever wanted to write short stories. Okay. And so I only ever wanted to write short stories, but I was writing stories about many of the characters that you see in the book, right? Self-contained stories. But my literary agent was like, there is no money in stories. I mean, she just, she kept it real. She was like, there's no money. She's a little short Irish American woman. She's like, there's no money in stories. So I lied to her that I was writing a novel. So I was like, okay, I'll write this beach read, kind of a light family drama, whatever. And then what happened was in the middle of that, I started having these ancestral dreams where people would come to me and I would wake up. And what's really interesting is, and I know there's some fiction writers in the room, for me, I have to fight for every bit of fiction. But I have these characters that won't let me go. But in the songs, which ground the book, I would wake up and I couldn't even keep up. Like I would wake up and I would just be writing. And that's how I write poetry. So it was really weird, right? And so then it was a hot mess for about 4 years.
Okay.
And then there was, and it's interesting because, sometimes the Lord just puts people in your life and they're not always African American. My village is mostly African American, but I have a few people who aren't. And there was a woman, Liz Van Hoos, I call her the novel whisperer. And my agent sent the book to her when I finished the first draft, the hot mess draft. And I remember her saying to me that my book was like a Kara Walker silhouette come to life. And it was like, I just sat and cried, and she was like, this book reminds me of Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. And I was like, what? Because I had someone tell me that my whole concept was pretentious. The name was pretentious because, I just have like a regular sister girl affect, right? And so, if I may, not many people really understand I am brilliant. I just, but in Black communities, particularly when you're a Black woman, you can't really walk around with that kind of, vibe. So you're just like, I'm just like, look, but also the reason when you talk about the people in the book, I wanted people to understand that country Black people are brilliant.
Yes.
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 Working class Black people are brilliant. Like in one of my books of poetry, it begins with an epigraph by my mother's father, because my mother would tell me all the things he would say. And it begins, tall trees catch wind. Like he had all of these brilliant proverbs. And my mother did too, although, my mother had a doctorate, right? She's Dr. Jeffers, I'm Professor Jeffers. But mama had this saying, you cannot play insane games with a madman and call yourself sane, right? So she had all of these. So I know I'm sort of, rambling, but this is the thing I wanted, but also as a Black woman in her 50s, right? I'm really the my generation is really the last generation that had contact with African American elders who remembered people who were born in slavery or born right after slavery. I wanted to leave something for like Margaret Walker Alexander, for my people with their dirges and their ditties. I wanted that. I wanted, and so The Age of Phyllis is for my people. This book is for my people. The next book. My first 4 books, they were for me when I was a young woman and I was, a messy kid and working it out. But I wanted to leave something so that in generations to come, this beautiful baby right here, she can read it and she can know what the elder sounded like, what those stories were, as people did for me.
Yes.
No.
So when I'm teaching, one of the things my students know that I will come up with one of my mother's sayings. I'm going to tell you up front so you don't stick out behind.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one right there.
Right, and so there was so much wisdom there, and that just comes through in this book. And the going down south to the country, to the farmland, every summer.
Every summer.
That's
how you learned your home training.
Oh, Lord.
That's how you learned how to act. That's how you learned your home training. That's how you learned a reverence for culture. And they didn't say it like that in that kind of vocabulary, but it is. Like, one of my dearest friends is the poet Sonia Sanchez, who is turning 90 on Monday. And so I call her, and I call her Miss Sonia. Now, a lot of people in the North, young Black folks, call her Sonia, and it just goes all through me. It just goes all the way through me. But it's always funny. I'll be on the phone with Miss Sonia and her favorite, my dear sister, blah, 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 right? That's her thing, right? And so we were on the phone, and she just last week, the personal things I wouldn't share, but this, I don't think she minds. And so I was telling her about, academia and how difficult it is. That's why I was clapping when they named your endowed chair. I have an endowed chair, and I walked over cut glass for that endowed chair. You know what I'm talking about. And it was worse for you. You made it possible for me to have my endowed chair. You know what I'm saying? And so I was talking to Miss Sonia, and I said, Miss Sonia, I don't know. And she said, you can support yourself from your writing if you really want to. And then she says, I remember having this conversation with Toni a few years. And I was like, Toni Morrison? And she said, yes, my dear sister, who do you think I'm talking about, right? She has mentioned Professor Morrison like 10 or 15 times over the years, but every time I'm like, oh my God, she spoke to Toni Morrison, right? But that's the thing. I always, and if you notice in the book, those people who read the book, Ailey always calls elders, right? Miss, doctor, whatever. And my agent, the great Aaron Wicks, who was a genius, and hurt me when she left Harper for another job, because we just moved like with one mind, one spirit, one heart. But sometimes she would ask, and she was a young white woman, she would say, well, why isn't she calling, why doesn't Belle call Martha, Martha? And I said, because she's Miss Martha, because that is the way we are reared.
Yes.
And I said, and this is a particular generation.
Yes.
But I had a very early reader say, why do we even have Martha? The real relationship is between Belle and Diane. And I said, Belle is a Black woman born in 1943 in Central Georgia. Because they were like, why has she got such an attitude with Diane? I said, because she's a white woman. And this is in the 60s, right? And this is the thing. I don't play those games. I think that we have to deal with the reality of history instead of pretending like everything was great. That's why so many of us were shell-shocked in 2016.
Well,
Because, you know what I mean? Because people were pretending like it was all good. And I'm like, okay, no.
no,
So anyway.
no.
Back to your question.
Okay, no. So, and that's true, because it was one of the things that I talk about, is that when Barack Obama was elected, we had this, look at us. We have crossed the racial Rubicon. We have overcome.
Hey, we done crossed the River Jordan.
No, no.
If anything, it got worse.
Yeah. Yes, it
But
did.
it always does.
Yes. Yes, I
It
do.
always does.
Yes, I do.
I mean, I know you know.
So my next question, I was struck by the way that sexual violence and trauma travel generations. Can you speak to that impact that it has had on these absolutely rich characters? And let me just say that when I was reading this, there's a song by Rachel Farrell called Wounds in the Way.
Oh, I love Rachel Farrell.
Yeah, and Wounds in the Way is from a Tyler Perry movie. And it deals with how we not only have faced these wounds of hurt and of betrayal, and of physical violence, but that how we're also carrying the physical violence and the hurt and the pain from generations before us.
That's right.
And we're carrying those wounds, and they get in the way of us being able to live into our full humanity. And so until we face those wounds, then it's always there. And so that's what struck me about this book as well. So I was singing some Rachel Farrell while I was reading.
I love Rachel Farrell. I love her range. I love her range. 8 octaves. I love her range. Well, I'm always honest about the fact that I am a survivor, okay? But I'm also honest about the fact that I'm not A-ly. So I keep having people saying, you're alien. I'm like, no, I would have loved to have had an Uncle Root in my life, And I think I wrote Uncle Root so that I could have somebody, you know what I mean? But yes, I'm a survivor. And and one of the reasons when I go places, I always try to look cute and, I beat my face and whatever, because I want people to understand that doesn't define you. Okay. I think my work, you never know, chicken, egg, what comes first, but I think my work, is going, the reason I focus on intimate violence is because this is what our foremothers had to deal with coming off the ship.
Yes.
And I have people on Instagram and they'll tag me and bless their hearts. And they'll say, and that's not I still use bless their heart in a good way, right? But they'll say, there are just so many trigger warnings and and it was upsetting to me. And I'm like, did you not see slavery on the back of the book? What did you think a book about slavery was gonna be? But what they want is a love story between a real pretty, real light-skinned woman with long, good hair and her master, and that, or they want a friendship, or they want, and I'm like, those were incredibly rare events. And so what I wanted to do, I talked about this when I had my conversation with Miss Oprah. And when she was saying, why did you have intimate violence in the book? And I said, it's a metaphor for this country. What happens in your youth if it is not resolved, right?
Yes.
And so, for me, this is the thing. It has not been resolved what has been done. Even if you give us reparations, there's still going to have to be more than money. Okay? There's going to have to be an acknowledgement that this country was founded, and no, please don't think this is any shade, but that 1619 is not when African Americans were here. They were here in the 16th century, in the 1500s, okay? So this has been going, they came with the Spaniards, okay, to Florida. This has been going on for a really long time. So what I wanted to show is generational trauma, because so many of us are dealing with that. So many of us are dealing with that, even to the point where you have like older Black folks that'll say, the problem right now is you don't whip your kids. And I'm like, I could see janking a kid, you know what I'm saying? Jank their collar, who you think you're talking to? But when you are beating a child on the bottom of their feet, when you are doing these sort of things, our slave masters did that, okay? And so, I wanted to show, and I mean, Ailey's a hot mess. Ailey's a mess. Ailey's a mess. And people would be dipping into my DMs on Instagram, and they would be like, what is the deal with Ailey? And now I don't, because the book has, sold so much. But in the early years, I was just so happy that somebody would read an 800-page book that I would be like, just give her time. Just keep on going. And then they come back and they'd be like, okay, wow. And that's what I wanted to show, because I know so many. I mean, the sad part is, it's a rare woman that hasn't been abused, a rare Black woman that hasn't been abused. And I wanted people to see, there can be joy. There can be joy. I have joy. I have peace now. And I never thought I would have that. I never in a million years, I thought I would close my eyes, always feeling ashamed, always feeling dirty, but no, I don't. And so I wanted people to see that, but I also, when the ancestors come back to Ailey, I wanted people to understand that there were people praying for us.
Yes, yes.
Before we were even thought of.
And I love the way that she recognized eventually Aggie as who came to her when she was doing that family history, the power of Aggie, and then how it just shook her something fierce.
It shook me because I have had ancestral visions. I have had deep ancestral visions, and and to know that I probably won't ever know my Native American ancestors. I won't be able to prove that, but I just do not believe that there are not. I mean, I went to University of Oklahoma and I didn't want to be at University of Oklahoma. I was offered another job, and this racist white man says to me, Well, the dean is offering you this much money, but I don't believe that you deserve this much money. That's how I ended up in Oklahoma, because they gave me the money. I was supposed to be going to another school. And Oklahoma is Native American Central. And so then I met the great Gary Hobson, renowned Native American scholar. And so I learned these sort of things, and he is the first person who acknowledged me as Afro-Indigenous. But, sometimes when you say, I'm part, I have Native American ancestry, people are like, oh, you don't want to be Black. That's what your problem is. You got halfway good hair. And when you get a silk press, they get really hostile, right? And you're like, do you see this dark skin? No, I couldn't even pass for Puerto Rican. Okay. So, I learned. And so one of the things with the book is that it's it's a tending of ancestral altars for those ancestors that I will never know their name. African ancestors, Native American ancestors. I haven't gotten to the point where I can honor my European ancestors because they were rapists. Oops. I'm sorry, baby. I keep forgetting there's a child in the room, right? But, I can't yet honor them, but yeah.
Why Du Bois?
Oh, wow.
Okay, and so what's gained by focusing on Du Bois? What were the constraints and what were the joys?
These are some great questions, Dr. Anderson. So, I have never told this story. I'm going to tell this story because I love you already, Dr. Anderson. You honor me just by being here. You are one of my heroes. I'm just a weepy person. And my mother used to complain about this. She was like, why can't you just get yourself together when you're on stage? Why are you always weeping, right? So my mother was the quintessential, strong Black woman. But so the book initially was called The Love Songs of E. Franklin Frazier. Okay. So it was really so much about class. Okay. So much about, you notice if you read the book, that's an ugly title. I know. Y'all are like, don't hurt me like that.
I know, I'm looking at Akiva, I'm looking at Jacinta, and they're like, whoa,
right.
no. I mean, yeah.
Right. So this is like in the very early stages. And so it was so much about class, about classism, because a lot of people outside of Black communities do not understand that there are socioeconomic classes, right? There was a reason that I included African American Greek letter organizations. There was an editor who wanted to cut all of the college section.
No.
She was like, because again, you have to understand, we're only important when we're interacting with white people. You do get that, right? We're only important when we're interacting with white people. And so there were all these all Black spaces, right? And she was like, I just don't really understand. And I said, this is the Black experience. My father taught at Howard with Toni Morrison. Okay. And Owen Dodson, he was friends with Owen Dodson and all of that, right? My father's a Black Arts Movement poet. And so, I'm like, you've got to understand, this is our culture, right? And I wanted Black people who knew this culture to recognize it. Okay. So, and then I wanted white readers to see parts that had been hidden, okay? So that they could really see us when they're not in the room, okay? Like a fly on the wall, right? Because yeah, they're really great nonfiction books that talk about, different things. But I'm like, but I wanted a book where they could really see our community, right? Like there's a quote from Du Bois, and then I'll get back to that, where he says, "You misjudge us because you do not know us." Okay? So run along. Uncle Root was only like a tangential character. He was only a tangential character. He just sort of, was kind of like, a foil, right? And so what happened was he just kept nudging
Yes, he did.
more and more into the book. And that story of when he met W.E.B. Du Bois. And my mother had been in the Atlanta. Mama's a proud Spelman graduate. My two sisters were Spelman graduates. I give money to Spelman. I'm a Talladegan. I'm the black sheep of the family. But the reason I'm not a Spelmanite is Spelman was recruiting me because, they love to have whole families go to Spelman. But I was a high school dropout and I refused to get my GED because I thought it was trashy. This is how stupid I was. I was 16. And so Spelman kept saying, you're either going to have a GED or you're going to have a high school transcript. And that's how I ended up at Talladega. That's the whole thing. So, but anyway, Mama had stories about when she was at Spelman in the 50s, and they would hear tell that Dr. Du Bois would be coming through the Atlanta University. And so that's how that sort of, fictionalized, like I was just like, that's interesting. And so when he kept coming through Uncle Root, who I fell in love with as a character, because Uncle Root is really a feminist, even though he refuses to identify that way. He loves Black women. He is against patriarchy. He is a down by law brother for the sisters, okay?
His last name.
Took Olivia's last name, okay? A brown-skinned woman, okay? And I did that on purpose. Because people need to know that there are many men who find us brown-skinned and chubby women beautiful, okay? So as Uncle Root started coming more and more into the book, and this story of when he met, it changes. But that's old people.
Yeah. Oh, don't I know?
I didn't say that, Doctor. So and then I started thinking about him. And then I have a really dear friend. I never mention him because I don't want to violate his privacy. But he is like a Yoruba priest, and he's really intellectual. And we would talk about Du Bois. We would talk about when Du Bois went to Ghana and all of that. And that's when the metaphor because Du Bois was a very complicated man. He was naughty. He was naughty. He was naughty. He cheated on Miss Nina with Jessie Fawcett. He cheated on Jessie Fawcett with other women. Like, he was just naughty, right?
David Levering Lewis called him pre-apic.
Oh, man. Isn't that 2-volume biography just genius? I read it twice, right? So as he started, and I started thinking about how he gave his entire life for us, as complicated as he was. And that's where and then there were the songs.
Yes.
And that's where the love songs. But people keep trying to make it about J. Alfred, T.S. Eliot and Prufrock. And I'm like, well, somebody wrote a whole review about the whole thing in the book was about passing. And I'm like, Because they really want this to be Lydia's book.
Oh.
Right. All the brown skin and dark brown skin women in the book, but I love Lydia. I think I did that. I think I really spent time with Lydia, and I cried when I wrote. I wept, but this is this is Ailey's book, and this is Aggie's book, and even Lydia says brown skin is the prettiest. Even Lydia. And my late sister, Cece, she was very fair-skinned, and she would fight you if you call her light-skinned. She would get mad. She's like, I'm brown. And I'm like, okay. Because she took after Daddy's side of the family. So, yeah, so when I thought about Du Bois, and and I knew it was going to be a difficult book, because it's an intellectual book, right? And people aren't used to that from anybody except white men and maybe the tart lady that wrote The Goldfinch or whatever, right? There's like maybe 2 white women. They're like, oh yeah, they're really smart. And then the rest are white men. And then Toni Morrison, but they don't really count her as Black. They don't. They're just like, she's different. And I'm like, Toni Morrison went to Howard and pledged Alpha Chapter of AKA, okay? So I knew that, yeah. And when Kamala Harris gets in the White House, y'all are gonna be insufferable. I know it. I know it. I know it.
Absolutely.
Are you an AK?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Yeah. And because even Miss Sonia, who never told me she was an AKA, I found out through the grapevine. And then yesterday we were on the phone, and she was saying, she really hopes Sister Kamala Harris got in the White House. And then she said, she's an AKA. Did you know I was an AKA? And I'm like, 20 years of friendship, and now you just want to say you're an AKA. This is funny, okay? I said, yes, ma'am, I knew. She said, how'd you know? I was like, I have my ways. I have my ways, right? Yeah.
So, because I was in Du Bois's papers for like 2 decades.
Did you read that letter that he wrote Miss Jessie about how he came by the house and sat outside? He came from the train station and sat outside and looked in the window and thought he would come in, but then he decided not to. And I thought, oh my God, Du Bois was a regular Negro. Brothers be like, I thought I was going to come through, but I just didn't want to pop up, And I was like, oh my God. This man, who first PhD from Harvard is just a brother, okay? It was funny to me. Yeah, it was funny.
Okay, so I've got regular Negro up there now.
But you went through the papers. You say you went through the papers.
I went through the papers, and so that's why the title of this book I found so intriguing, because Du Bois was so complicated and so messy and so committed to Black folk.
So committed. And he was probably an abused child himself. I do know if he wasn't abused, he was very much marked by poverty. And so that whole thing about he always wore a suit,
Yes.
My mother was like that. My mother, because when she went to Spelman, it was very colorist and it was very classist. And Mama said, she had 2 pairs of shoes, right? And so she said this one girl came up to her and said, if I saw those shoes in Paris, I would know they were yours. And Mama said, and if you see my shoes in Paris, will you bring them back to me? Because I really need my shoes. Mama was the queen of the clapback. But on the other hand, and you can read just a little snippet about that I was in Yisha Rasco's book, HBCU Made. And the other wonderful thing about Spelman, though, she had a mentor who, when Mama was going through teacher training, and this woman was, I guess she came from money, so she would go to Paris every year to get new clothes. Uh-oh. Okay. And so just one second. When Mama was going through teacher training, she said, Mamselle James, because that was Mama's last name, she gave Mama her season before all her clothes from Paris for teacher training. That's Black women.
Yeah. And I saw that with Dr. Alejandro right here. She was
Oladara.
She was also just that incredible mentor that was there that Ailey could go to. And she would just help guide Ailey, not by telling her what to do, but by giving her a pathway. And that pathway just opened up the world to Ailey.
Because you have to have your gray-headed Black folks. You know, because white folks aren't going to tell you certain things, but Black people be like, let me pull your coat.
Yeah. Let me tell you how this thing really runs.
Let me tell you how this thing works.
Really runs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I got the notice that we have to wrap up, so I've got one last question, although I have 4 more here.
I know I'm long-winded. I'm so sorry.
No, this was so good, so good. What's your next book?
So my next book is the book of my life, but it's a book that I didn't want to write, but I had to write. And it's about, both a memoir of my life, but a memoir of Black women in America. And it's about, the reason it's a scary book is it's about my very difficult relationship with my mother, but how she made me. Like, I would not be the person that I am without her. And it's a forgiveness memoir as well. So that's the next book, and it's called Misbehaving at the Crossroads.
Ooh, looking forward to it. Looking forward to it. Do we have one more? Is that?
No, maybe you could read an excerpt.
Yeah, can you read an excerpt from it?
Okay, so from Love Songs or from the other?
From the other.
Okay, all right. So this is a very short, don't be scared, it's in 16 point font. This is what this book is about. It's called Altar Call. This is what you need to know about me. I am my mother's child, though for years I pretended otherwise. Like Mama, I am a storyteller. I can paint a journey until you surrender and curl in the palm of my hand. I can bend a rhythm and make it holler. Sure enough, I'll whisper a word into submission. What else you should know is that my entire maternal line is from Eatonton, Georgia, a place of red dirt, slavery, Jim Crow, and indigenous echoes. I have a father that I knew. He lived in my household, and I carry his last name, but I was truly raised by Trellie Lee James Jeffers, a woman who grew up in tangled country woods, what the Southern hip-hop brothers Goody Mob called the Dirty South. I'm strong back with big roach-stomping feet and plenty meat jiggling on my frame. In Mama's hometown, they used to call a girl like me big-boned. When summers arrived, my mother would drive my sisters and me further south from Durham, North Carolina. In Eatonton, I would walk the cramped street of my grandma's neighborhood, what used to be Concord Avenue. Men and boys would say I was pretty and fine, and I, a teenager who'd spent years in the Black bourgeoisie, a place where darker skin and fleshy arms and big thighs were viewed as crimes, would slow my walk in the heat. I courted that adoration. I'd had so little beauty in my life, so I drank every sweetness. I let it paint my tongue. It was in Eatonton that I learned the down-home grandeur and complicated wisdom of my family's women, how they embraced community yet regularly misbehaved. I saw or heard tell of those women building up a man with charm, how they fed these men heavy seasoned food, laundered and pressed shirts until the cat faces disappeared, smiled at his bullish compliments. But when angered or capricious, these women, my women, could cut the flesh from bones with dangerous tongues, sever men's feelings out of their souls, let them know it didn't matter what the world thought outside of Georgia. It didn't matter how the world was wrought. Down in the red dirt, a Black woman held the true power. She just loaned it to a man for a while. These are the names of the women of my line, starting with my mother, reaching back until history refuses paper. Trellie Lee, Florence, Louvenia, Mandy, Clarissa. Yet my words are for all my sisters. And when I say sisters, I mean those Black women who are trans, cisgender, non-binary, straight, lesbian, stud, and femme. You are my kindred, and we are a crossroads. In our bodies, in our personal and public histories, we holler aberrance and ecstasy. For you, my sisters, I will descend into history, and I will conjure my own life as Black and woman child. Sometimes I have lived what our people call the blues, though I'm no Robert Johnson. I didn't give up my soul when I arrived at the crossroads, the spot of my making. I can't call the devil by name, and for that I am truly glad. But I made the acquaintance of a different kind of spirit. Kneeling in the red dirt, I laid my head on my dark mother's belly. Thank you.
No, you all don't want to see me again, but thank you both so much, so much. Oh, you're weeping. You're going to make us weep. But thank you for sharing that with us. And Dr. Anderson, thank you so much. And I know you have more questions. But that's okay. They might be some of the same questions that the audience has, so we will put it out. I will give you an opportunity to, I will give you an opportunity to ask your questions. Does anyone have one? Okay, well then, thank you very much. Nobody has one? Oh, I thought, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. Okay. Why don't you come up? Yeah, why not? There you go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
One of the most incredible books I've ever read, and the richest characters I've ever experienced. When I finished the book for the second time, I mourned the characters being out of my life again. Like, I literally mourned. And so my question is, about your process. I'm curious, and you said that ancestors spoke to you, and so that was part of your process. And I'm wondering, as I look in the text at the really extensive timeline and family tree that you developed, is all of that sort of part of the fictional development of your imagination, or is any of that drawn from your sort of lived experience? Like, have you created that completely from your imagination, or are you drawing from any sort of lived experience at all in the development of those folks and that timeline?
So, so many of us in Georgia who are African American have mixed race ancestry. Okay, if we go back, we can always bump into that slave master or whatever. And so I am black, blackety black, 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 and I am a deep brown woman. Okay, dark brown at times. And so it is weird for me to say I'm also a mixed race person, but I'm African American first. Okay. So my mother had, her great grandfather was biracial. Okay. My father's people were very, like, how you get, we don't see it too much now, but it used to be back in the day, you'd have a whole family of real light-skinned people with not one brown person. Like, they would make sure they would not marry anybody. But then, Africa will come back. And so they had that one little brown person and they be trying to cover them in the picture or whatever. So what I was doing was really trying to depict what is real. Okay. But in terms of the family tree and all of that, like Ernest Gaines always returns to Bayonne Parish, like Louise Erdrich always returns to the Native American reservation that she, envisioned, we're always going to come back to Chickasetta. I have short stories that are under contract, and I have a novel, a second novel that returns to Chickasetta. So what I did was I had to create an entire history of Chickasetta, going all the way back. So when people were born, it's exhausting. When people, but you do these sort of things. So that's the process, right? Because you don't want to be caught out. There's a timeline glitch in the novel. And it angered me that the copy editors didn't catch it. The Italian translators caught it. So you don't really want to be caught out with your timeline glitches and all of that. But in terms of just like the day-to-day, I write. Yeah. As the great Toni Morrison said, and I do not compare myself to Toni Morrison. I tell people to calm down when they say, "Oh, this book reminded me." I'm like, no. Toni Morrison was a genius.
You are too.
Thank you. But let's wait until I have, 5 novels or something, right? But so really just in terms of process, she always said, I don't write every day, but I think about writing every day. Yeah. There's not a day that goes by, even the Lord's Day, because writing is my form of prayer, that I'm not thinking about writing or I'm writing. But I also understand that this is soul work and it is taxing on the spirit. And so I can't do 5 hours like I used to when I was a young girl. I'm 57. So now I do 2 to 3, but I'm consistent. And this is what I tell my students. If you produce 2,000 words a week, 1,500 words a week, within 52 weeks, you have a first draft of a book. Sonny Sanchez told me that, right? You just have to be consistent. You also have to ignore people who want to make you feel stupid. And I think women of all complexions, racial backgrounds, people are always trying to diminish us and make us feel like we're not worthy. I had a professor who is now retired, and he was like a theory wonk. And theory is my weakness. And so I asked him, I said, could you, just kind of put together a little syllabus, for me, so I would, and he said, oh, don't worry about that. Just go shopping. Right. So when Love Songs.
Okay, the look on your face is just MasterCard priceless right now.
When Love Songs was picked for the Oprah Book Club pick, I annoy these people. I get right on my departmental listserv. Dear colleagues, I am so happy to announce every time, right? And so, yeah, but I think you really do, because the old folks will tell you, everybody ain't praying for you. Okay? Everybody ain't praying for you, so.
Let's see, anybody else? Who can project? Okay. Okay.
Your name has such a rhythm to it. What is the origin of it?
So, Trellie Lee James, class of Spelman College, class in 1955, had a degree in French literature. Okay. So I am named, well, I get that later. I am named after Honorée de Balzac, the 19th century French author, and France Fanonne, but because I'm a woman, it's Fanonne, right? My late sister, Sidonie Colette, was named after Sidonie Colette, right? And then my oldest sister, Valjean Michel, is named after Jean Valjean and Les Miserables. I guess they were having a hard time then. But so we all have French names, and but my mother, but Honorée means the honored one. And so my mother told me that the day that I was born, she looked in my newborn face and saw what would come to pass. And that's why she named me Honorée.
Wow, 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 wow.
When you started writing, what kept you like connected with it, or what kept you thinking and wanting to write and do poetry?
This is always the question I wait for. Thank you, Miss Lady. I read. So when I was about 9 or 10, I don't know how old you are, I buddy read Roots with my daddy. And Roots was my first big book. And I read. And people picked at me and they called me a nerd and they did whatever. But reading was really it to me. And I went places in my imagination, you know, and you know, I went to London in my imagination, and what was so funny is when I finally went to London, I was like, this isn't as good as Charles Dickens. This isn't as exciting as my imagination. But that's what I did, darling. I read a lot. You can't be a writer without being a reader. And so, and I also, even though I was a little girl, I had in my secret heart that I wanted to be a writer, and I believed in myself. Even when, and my mother always told me I was going to be a writer. She said, "You're going to be a writer," you know. And so, you know, believe in yourself, because every famous writer that you meet was once a little kid. You know, they didn't spring out of God's head, you know. Toni Morrison was a little girl, you know, Alice Walker was a little girl. So that's what, and if you don't mind, if you don't feel comfortable, that's okay. Can you tell me your name?
My name is Carrington.
I will look for you in the bookstore. No, I really will. I read my poetry in front of Gwendolyn Brooks when I was 17 years old, and she told me I had wonderful metaphors. I will never forget that. I will never forget that. I held on to that for years.
That's been anointed.
Okay, yes.
We have another question.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm going to compare one more time, but in a good way. This book did to me the same thing the song Solomon did to me. In a way that it connects me to people who my soul knows. I didn't know, but my soul knows, and the spirituality of our people. And I'm wondering if the elements of the supernatural that are in this book were deliberate, or do you think that the story would have been insincere, incomplete, if that supernatural is innate in the story, or was it deliberate?
Well, it took me a really long time to acknowledge that, I was a spiritual person, because, I'm not, sometimes I go to church, but not really, but I'm an unabashed Jesus lover, but I'm not really like the whole politics of church. Sometimes it's just too much for me. But, my second mother, Lucille Clifton, the poet Lucille Clifton, had visions. She was my dear, dear friend, and I'm actually writing the biography of Lucille Clifton. And so y'all keep me in prayer. Yeah, it's under contract, but it's a daunting kind of thing. But she had visions. And so when I would think about visions, there would be, people I would meet and they would say, I have spiritual visions. And, they'd be wearing like flowing linen garments and big old chunky beads, and they just had like this thing, right, that I just didn't want to take on. But Miss Lucille was just like a regular person who had visions. Like I remember, I had a vision that President Obama was going to be president when he first started, and I was like, "There's no way he can win. What is this about?" Right? But it was, and so I had a vision that Natasha Trethewey was going to be the inaugural poet, and Miss Lucille said, "Oh no, Ani, it's going to be Elizabeth Alexander." And I said, "No, no, no, no! I saw him next to Natasha Trethewey." And she said, okay. That's what Miss Lucille was. And so then when he chose Elizabeth, I called up Miss Lucille and I said, I just don't even understand. I had the vision. And she said, well, Lonnie, my roots are just a little bit stronger than yours. But she did become the poet laureate. She did stand next to him. But in our community, in this Black Southern community, we accept that there are other ways of being, and that's always been the case, right? So even if we are churchgoers, church mothers, there's the Bible, and then there is your spirit, right? But I do have to admit, I come from, my great grandmother was a root worker. Okay. So I come from that, right? But it was going to Oklahoma, meeting Native American people who were professors, because it's kind of difficult sometimes to meet Black folks who are academics who, unless they're like in Yoruba or something like that, right? But in the Native American community, it just is. It doesn't matter how the level of education. And so then I started thinking back to the way I was a little girl, right? That my grandmother would say, don't cut your toenails and throw them outside. Somebody will get your toenails and wrote roots on you. Oh, she was dead serious about that, right? She used to get really angry when I walked barefoot outside. So there were all of these sort of things. And again, I just kind of wanted to incorporate, but I am a deeply spiritual person and I follow my spirit in ways that I didn't when I was a young woman. But what happened was it would always turn out wrong when I ignored my spirit. And so now it just is what it is. And if somebody wants to make fun of me, they can. But I had a vision I was going to talk to Oprah Winfrey. And I thought it was a false vision. And so the day I saw this, block number, and I ignored it, and the person just kept calling, and then she I picked up and the person said, may I speak to Honorée Jeffers? And I said, who is this? I'm busy. Because I thought it was an ex-boyfriend or his wife or something. You get these women and I'm like, I haven't dated him in years, And so when it finally, we went back and forth and we went back and forth and finally she got that sound to her voice and she said, this is Oprah Winfrey. And I was like, ugh. And then I was like, oh my God. And that's, I think, when it really started. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, even though there are several hands. Okay, I saw you first. Yeah, what's your question?
Did you have a hand in picking out the narrators for your audiobook?
I did. So thank you. I loved the brother's voice, the one that reads the Du Bois quote. Woo, his voice was like butter. So
His wife is going to be calling.
I know. And them married women got hands. So you gotta be careful, right? I don't know. So I'm like, no thanks. So, but what happened was they told me I could have one narrator. And then I just thought, closed mouths don't get fed. So I said, can I have a male narrator for the Du Bois quotes? And I felt like the lady that Karen Chilton that did the narration for the songs, she has a gravitas to her voice, right? And I thought that was very important, And so they said yes. They said yes.
I'm a pushover, so I'm just gonna, if you don't mind, one last question. Okay. Okay, come. And then we can line up to do a book signing.
Okay, so I just first off have to say that this book is probably one of my favorites, like completely. So I also have a message from somebody. So my uncle has been incarcerated for 28 years. For context, I'm 31. So most of my interactions with him have been through the prison system. And so he gets out in 2 years, which we're all excited about. But earlier this year, we were like saying we wanted to have a book club. And so I was like, I have the perfect book. I was like, it's a little long, like just a little bit long, but He's like, okay. And so we've been talking and going through the book. And initially I had a list of questions. I was like, hey, what parts made you feel sad? What parts made you feel happy? How'd you feel? And from the beginning, he was like, Kashara, I'm just gonna let you know, like, I've been in here so long that to have emotions is a weakness. And so I'm not accustomed really to like tapping into emotions. And so he was like, first off, this is the biggest book I've ever read. But he's now at like page 650. And he will call me and he'll be like, this part reminded me of when your grandmother did this. And we have whole conversations about his feelings about things. And so he told me to tell you, he absolutely loves the book. He cannot put it down, that he's so thankful that you wrote it, and to please keep doing your work. I told him I was going to let him know. He's like, please, if you talk to her, don't forget that I told you to say that.
Tell him I appreciate him so very much.
So I had a question about Coco. I listened to a podcast episode, I think like last year, and you wanted.
She's coming.
Okay, I was going to ask that.
She's coming. People, let me just break it down for you. As a straight, woman, and this was my first novel. What I didn't want is for people to get the idea that what I was trying to say is that Coco was a lesbian because she had been abused. That to me is dangerous. Okay? That's dangerous to say, oh, you don't like men because of blah, 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 blah. So I was scared. It was my first novel and I didn't know. And I had spent all this time on the Native American stuff because I was afraid of being dragged by the Native American community. So I don't feel like I gave Coco short shrift because there are other people where we don't, we don't get a whole bunch of them either. But I do know that for a lot of people, it seemed like I was giving her short shrift because she was queer. And that is not the case. And I felt okay about, first of all, to write a Coco section would have made the book like 1,000 pages, okay? But I knew that I was writing a novel where Coco was the protagonist. So that will be coming. If God says the same. So keep me in prayer. I'm unabashed asking people to keep me in prayer.
Well, I was gonna say that I picked up on that, and I actually thought that to an extent it felt like realistic that she wasn't as included, because I don't know about other people's families, but I've got people in my family who are trans or who are queer, and because of the discomfort that you experience from families who are more conservative, it does at times feel like you're getting glimpses of their lives over time. They're not there.
Well, the real reason that there wasn't a big Coco whatever is that if you are in a big family, and this, I'm gonna wrap this up. If you are in a big, if you are in a family, a Black family, there's always that one person who's got it together. Okay? Coco is that person.
Mm-hmm.
Coco is the one that's got it together. She's paying for everything.
Mm-hmm.
She's taking care of that low down Nana Claire. Oh, I hate Nana Claire. Oh, I hate her so much. But she
Show.
right. But listen, I have met so many Nana Claires. Yeah. But so she's taking care of everybody. She's a doctor. She's this, that, and the other. And in a novel, to be honest, without conflict, there is no story. Okay? And I didn't want to have this is how Coco became a lesbian. Like, I just felt like that would be rude because being queer is normal. That is that's my attitude. God has many faces, and he, she, they has made us in the beauty of God, right? And so I didn't want there to be this whole, this is how she became a lesbian and da 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 da. So, but she's really got it together. She really doesn't have big problems. Her biggest problem is Ailey. Her broke self.
Ailey alone.
So anyway, and I'll be signing books. So if people have questions that you were kind of embarrassed to ask or whatever.